Reflections of a Student Pastor by Melvin Herring. I don't want to be a minister. Ever since the time 20 years ago when a 7-year-old egotist bearing my name consecrated his conceited little carcass to the Christian ministry and to the alleviation of the earth's ills, I've had a sneaking suspicion that I didn't want to be a minister. Most of the time I've been afraid to mention this in the presence of my ego for fear that it would brand me as a coward and traitor, if not something worse. However, during the last 11 years which I have spent in preening my intellectual tail feathers in university and seminary, and displaying them for the benefit of certain long-suffering student pastorates, the conviction has been gaining ground in the abysmal depths of my mind that I don't want to be a minister. The reason for this is very simple. I want, above everything else, to be a human being, and a man cannot be a minister and a human being at the same time, whether he be liberal or conservative, orthodox, heterodox, or without a dox in his head. If he is a minister, he will find himself bafflingly entangled by innumerable, almost imperceptible, yet ever so real threads of social expectation. He will find himself encased like a sausage in its skin by the doubtless well-meant, but nonetheless rigid, code for ministers, which all congregations hold it their inalienable right to enforce. If he refuses to be so imprisoned, and insists on bursting his chrysalis to emerge as a human being, he will discover to his dismay that there has been prepared for him that most subtle form of torture, the pangs of his own conscience. In all likelihood, of course, no one will ever tell him that he has violated the congregation-made ministerial ethic, but he will be so highly praised for what slight deeds of righteousness he does that he cannot help being aware, first of all, what the congregation expects of him, and second, of the fact that with almost godlike omniscience they are observing his every act. Thus, haunted and hounded by the great expectations of his flock, the minister struggles pathetically to achieve that neither human nor divine status which is alluded to in the group vernacular as being a good minister. This perhaps in itself is not a bad thing. There are doubtless many young men who enjoy being thus bound by the ministerial ethic and conventions which are contemporary. They find orientation in life and recognition for underfed egos as they remind themselves that much is expected of them. For these docile souls, the ministry offers great possibilities. But I don't want to be a minister. I don't want all of my life sucked like an empty orange of its sense of joy because the presence of a ministerial categorical imperative which makes duties out of what might and should be spontaneous joys. For example, I don't want to have to remember that the minister is expected to know and like everybody in the community. As a matter of fact, I do like most people, but I don't see why I should go down the street of my little town nodding enthusiastically like an expectant politician, searching every visage that I meet for a glimmer of recognition which warns me that I must have met him a year ago at somebody's family reunion. Constantly haunted by the fear that I have inadvertently ignored someone who thinks that I should have spoken to him. Then again, I am tired of the expectation that sees the minister as everybody's perennial little ray of sunshine, the life of every party, full of the peace which passeth understanding and overflowing with joy unbounded forever and ever. I'm reasonably cheerful, I think, but to feel that I must be cheerful in order to meet the unspoken requirements of my group annoys me like a cold in the head. It galls me to have to feel that I am being coerced into good nature. Furthermore, there are many times when I feel more like a rain cloud than a ray of summer sunshine, and at these times I crave the privilege of sneaking off and abiding beneath the shadows of my own morbid moods without being constantly pursued by the thought of what the congregation might think. Not only that, but I am tired of having it taken for granted that I am a normal man. This, of course, for smaller communities, means that I never smoke, drink, chew, cuss, or kiss pretty girls. While I am not avidly inclined to any of these things, I have a prodigious resentment for the implication that I could not do them if I wanted to. The tacit understanding creature is without desire and above these things. In consequence, I cry out in agony of loneliness at being cut off in this fashion from my fellow creatures. Finally, I hesitate to expose the girl to whom I shall try to sell the idea of becoming a minister's wife to the plague of congregational expectation. She would suffer, doubtless, far more from the ravages of this insidious disease than I, who have become, in part at least, immune to its effects. She would be expected, of course, to be a leading light in the local community and society for the betterment of womanhood, a model of womanly virtue, able to speak, sing, or pray in public at a moment's notice, the devoted mother of 5 or 6 beautiful children, angels, everyone, a sympathetic listener, one of the hardest requirements, an inveterate caller upon of the sick and sorrowful. I have no doubt that she would be well able to fulfill these paltry requirements. Nevertheless, I resent with all my heart the proprietary air with which the church members will compete for my wife's time and attention, and I especially shrink from the way in which she will eventually come to feel that she too ought to do this, that, or the other thing, because it is expected of her as a minister's wife. It would not be so bad if this oughtness of the minister's life and the minister's wife could be contained in their own souls. The trouble is, it seems to permeate the spirit of most of those with whom the minister comes in contact. Thus, if the pastor does not make calls, he is condemned for negligence. If he does, the called upon usually seem to accept his presence as evidence that he is doing his duty, and the visit becomes as impersonal as the ringing of a cash register. Again, does the minister happen to be decent, kind, vigorous, modest? If so, imagine his embarrassment when, after having himself raised up as an example for little Willie, who has been naughty, this is bad enough, he hears little Willie pipe, "Ah, well, he's a minister," which is, my friends, by interpretation, "Oh, well, he's paid for being good." Thus it is, then, that the minister is forced to shed his human personality in order that he may become an emblem for his congregation, an albatross for their necks, a cross for them to bear, though indeed he must always be careful not to make himself too heavy, a sacrificial offering, lamb or goat, to relieve them of their sins, a rosary for their consciences to fondly finger. In a word, he becomes a fetish, a charm, a token, a symbol into which the congregation wants to read all of its unrealized and unrealizable ideals and aims, and by means of which it hopes somehow to obtain eternal salvation. Woe be, therefore, to the poor symbol which does not measure up, for lo, it shall be rooted up and cast into outer darkness. I don't want to be a minister. That is, I don't tonight. Tomorrow, with all the joys and compensations which my calling brings, I would not trade my lot for any in the world.